Hey everyone, today we need to talk about something that just happened in Washington, and the number you're about to hear is the one nobody wants you to see. Picture this: 1804, a young inventor named John Isaac Hawkins patents a wooden machine with two pens connected by mechanical arms. Sign one letter. The machine duplicates it on another sheet of paper instantly. Thomas Jefferson buys one. He installs it at Monticello. He writes to a friend calling it, quote, the finest invention of the present age. 221 years later, that same technology sits in the West Wing of the White House. And on October 28, 2025, the House Oversight Committee released a 140-page report calling it the center of what they described as the biggest political scandal in modern American history. The technology is called the Autopen. The chairman leading the investigation is James Comer. He has spent 47 hours in closed-door depositions asking one question: who was actually signing the documents in the Biden White House? Now you might think, political drama, Washington noise doesn't touch me. Stay with me, because if what Congress uncovered holds up in court, thousands of federal actions that shape your business, your regulations, and even federal pardons could be legally in question. Hit that subscribe button because this one goes deep. October 28, 2025, the House Oversight Committee released a bombshell report titled, quote, The Biden Autopen Presidency, Decline, Delusion, and Deception in the White House. The report was based on 14 depositions and transcribed interviews conducted with President Biden's senior White House aides. Total interview time, nearly 47 hours across 4 months of investigation. The core finding, according to the committee, President Biden's inner circle exercised presidential authority using an automatic signature machine during the final years of his term. And in some cases, aides testified they did not know who was giving final authorization for those signatures. 3 of Biden's closest aides, his personal physician, Dr. Kevin O'Connor, Deputy Chief of Staff Annie Tomasini, and Senior Advisor Anthony Bernal, refused to answer questions. All 3 invoked the Fifth Amendment. Chairman Comer immediately sent a letter to Attorney General Pam Bondi requesting the Department of Justice review every executive action taken during the Biden presidency. That is the trigger. Now stay with me, because the math on what could be affected, that goes far beyond one president. Before we go further, you need to understand what the AutoPen actually is. It is not new technology. It was invented in 1804 by John Isaac Hawkins. Thomas Jefferson bought one and used it at Monticello to duplicate his correspondence. He called it, quote, the finest invention of the present age. Fast forward to 1942. An American engineer named Robert DeShazo Jr. filed a Navy contract for a modernized version of the device. Within a decade, Autopens filled congressional offices, cabinet secretaries' desks, and eventually the White House. By 2005, the Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel had issued formal guidance stating a president can legally use an autopen to sign legislation. In 2011, Barack Obama became the first president to publicly acknowledge using the autopen on federal legislation, the Patriot Act extension. He was in France at the time. Every modern president has used the autopen. Trump has used it. Obama used it. George W. Bush used it. Biden used it. Every one of them. What is different this time isn't the technology. What is different, according to Chairman Comer's committee, is the claim that Biden's aides were making the decisions the autopen was signing, not Biden. That is the accusation. And whether it holds up, that depends on the numbers. Here is what the political class doesn't want you to hear. The scale of what could potentially be affected is enormous. During Biden's 4-year term, he signed over 160 executive orders, more than 4,000 executive memoranda and proclamations, hundreds of federal pardons in his final weeks alone, and dozens of judicial nominations. If a federal court ever ruled that any of those actions were signed without the president's direct authorization, the legal fallout would ripple through American business. Federal regulations that companies restructured to comply with, pardons that former officials relied on, judicial appointments issuing rulings today, all of it, potentially subject to legal challenge. The committee's transcribed interviews revealed how the process actually worked. Neera Tanden, Biden's former Domestic Policy Council director, testified for 5 hours. According to sources familiar with her testimony, she said she was authorized to direct Autopen signatures, but was not always clear on who in the inner circle was giving her the final approval. This is where the story gets uncomfortable for both sides. On November 28th, 2025, President Trump posted on Truth Social that he was declaring any documents signed by Biden via AutoPen to be void. But there is a problem with that declaration. In March 2026, the Department of Justice under Attorney General Pam Bondi quietly closed its own criminal investigation. According to sources familiar with the review, prosecutors were unable to build a case. That is the math. That is where the story stalls. Now step into the shoes of a small business owner in Ohio. You run a manufacturing firm with 40 employees. You have operated for 18 years. In 2023, your industry was hit with a new Environmental Protection Agency regulation. The regulation required you to install new emission controls at a cost of $340,000. You took out a loan. You installed the equipment. You reorganized your compliance department to meet the reporting requirements. That regulation was authorized by a Biden executive order. Now imagine you turn on the news in November 2025. The current president of the United States is announcing on social media that Biden executive orders signed by AutoPen are, quote, null and void. But nobody has told you which orders were signed by AutoPen. Nobody has told your compliance officer whether your regulation still applies. Nobody at the EPA has clarified what your reporting requirements are for next quarter. Your bank wants to know whether the $340,000 sitting on your balance sheet is still a required expense. You are not a lawyer. You are not a constitutional scholar, but you are the person who has to make payroll on Friday. Now, here is the number nobody in Washington wants you to see. Over 4 years of the Biden presidency, approximately 4,245 executive documents were published in the Federal Register. Executive orders, proclamations, memoranda, determinations, and presidential findings. Every one of those documents contains a presidential signature. Of those, hundreds were signed while Biden was traveling, in different time zones, on different continents, at times when in person signing would have been physically difficult. The committee's report does not claim every AutoPen use was improper. What the report found, based on 47 hours of sworn testimony, was that aides could not always identify who in the inner circle authorized the machine's use. That is a governance question, and it applies to more than just Biden. According to reporting by NBC News, Chairman James Comer sent 16 letters to Biden White House officials during his investigation. A metadata analysis of those letters revealed something interesting. Comer's own signature on those investigation letters was a digital picture, inserted electronically, not a physical signature. The chairman investigating the AutoPen used a digital signature on the investigation. The math is uncomfortable for everyone, and it gets worse. In March 2026, the New York Times reported that the Department of Justice, under pressure from the Trump administration, had spent months investigating the AutoPen use and had closed the case. According to sources familiar with the probe, prosecutors were unable to build a criminal case. That means despite the Oversight Committee report, despite the Truth Social declarations, despite the executive orders calling for review, no criminal charges are moving forward. Meanwhile, the underlying legal question, whether executive actions signed by AutoPen are valid, has already been partially addressed. In 2024, a three-judge panel of the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled in the case Rosemond versus Hudgens that presidential pardons do not have to be signed in writing to be legally binding. The constitutional text, according to that ruling, is silent on any particular form the president's clemency actions must take, which means the political scandal, real or perceived, may have already been legally settled by a federal court that most Americans have never heard of. What are the people in charge doing about it? They are doubling down. Chairman Comer has announced additional depositions. The White House has continued to declare selected Biden actions void. President Biden has continued to publicly deny the allegations, calling them, quote, ridiculous and false. His inner circle continues to invoke the Fifth Amendment, and here is where both sides failed the regular family. On one side, you have congressional investigators using the same digital signature technology they are calling a scandal, sending investigation letters signed by AutoPen while accusing the previous White House of using an AutoPen. On the other side, you have a former administration whose senior aides could not clearly answer, under oath, who was authorizing presidential decisions in the final year of that term. Neither side wants to defend the technology on the record, but everyone in Washington has been using it for 60 years, and the small business owner in Ohio still doesn't know whether her EPA compliance is required next quarter. And Washington is not alone. The 2005 Justice Department memo that established the legal framework for autopen use has never been overturned. Every state governor's office, every federal agency, every congressional office, state legislatures, municipal offices, school boards, all of them use some form of signature automation today. The technology that has been embedded in American governance since 1942 is now the subject of a nationwide conversation nobody is having in public. If the executive branch can void the signatures of a previous administration, every future incoming president has that same power over the outgoing one. The precedent, if it holds, does not favor one side. It destabilizes both. So let's bring it full circle. In 1804, Thomas Jefferson bought an invention called the polygraph and used it to sign his correspondence at Monticello. He called it the finest invention of the present age. In 2025, that same technology, now called the Autopen, sits in the White House and the offices of every congressional committee in Washington, including the one investigating it. Here's the bottom line. The Oversight Committee's report is real. The 47 hours of testimony are real. The 3 aides who took the fifth are real. And so is the fact that no criminal case has been built, and the courts have already ruled that written signatures aren't legally required for presidential actions. The scandal, or the perception of one, is real. What is not clear is whether it changes anything on the ground for the manufacturing firm in Ohio waiting for guidance on her EPA compliance. So I want to hear from you in the comments. Should Congress be allowed to void a previous administration's actions based on how they were signed, or should the courts have the final say? Drop your take below, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss the next breakdown. Stay informed, stay engaged, and never stop asking who really pays the bills.